Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. My name is Cordamt, and in this video I will be making a guide for new players wanting to get into Pathfinder Kingmaker. So Pathfinder Kingmaker is a classic RPG, or a CRPG for short. It very much follows in the same style as the old school popular games of this style, such as Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, the Icewind Dale games, Planescape Torment, stuff like that. Although it does bring you a somewhat more modern look and feel to it. It's playing with a more modern game engine, it has modern graphics, modern animations, stuff like that, but the gameplay itself will be quite familiar if you've played those other games. Now, something that's important to make a distinction here from the start is that Pathfinder Kingmaker is called Pathfinder because it is based in the Pathfinder system. It is not a Dungeons & Dragons game. I know that for some people it might seem like it is, but these are actually different systems. So Pathfinder and Dungeons & Dragons are different, but they do share the same underlying system, which is the D20 system. I will explain a little bit better what that is in a second. There will be some gameplay mechanic differences between these two, but for the most part the biggest difference is, world related. So the world lore, the universe, the map, the gods and deities and all that, it's its own setting in Pathfinder. You even have classes for your characters here that don't exist in Dungeons & Dragons. But again, the gameplay feel is similar. One thing to be said though, in terms at least of the video games, is that in my opinion Pathfinder is the most complex classic RPG that you can play. And that's both a good thing as well as a source of some frustration and, new players feeling overwhelmed by the sheer amount of options and complexity that the game has to offer. So the positives naturally are, it makes the game more interesting, you have a lot more flexibility, you have a lot more replayability, you can do all sorts of different characters and party compositions to, go through the game, and it's really cool. But, like I said, it can feel very overwhelming for a new player. So the purpose of this video is to not delve into very advanced topics. This is mostly a compilation of things that I find are important for a new player to know when you want to, try out this game. So, briefly discussing the D20 system. Like I said, it's the same underlying system for Dungeons & Dragons and Pathfinder, that's why they may feel very similar. And it's basically just a system that will govern how game actions are taken. So essentially everything you do in this game, much like in Dungeons & Dragons, is decided based on rolling dice. So as a few examples, you attack an enemy. To determine if you hit or you miss, you roll dice. If you hit, how much damage do you deal? You roll dice. If you want to try and persuade someone in a dialogue through a persuasion check, you roll dice. So everything is based on rolling of the dice. Now, how does the game build itself around that? Because if it's only rolling dice, it would just be random. The game builds itself by trying to stack as much bonuses as you can on top of your party, while also trying to apply as many penalties as you can on your enemies. Either doing that, applying penalties to overcome their defenses, or just trying to pretty much brute force their defenses by stacking insurmountable amounts of bonuses on your side. So Pathfinder is really a lot a game of stacking numbers for your advantage. So the first topic I have, I'm actually going to go back to the first screen here. So if you start a new game, you're going to get this screen. I'm only going to be focusing on main story. I won't be considering the DLCs here. The first screen after you select a new game is going to be the difficulty you want to play in. You have several difficulties, but the game defaults to normal. I am choosing the difficulty selection screen as my top priority for this guide, because I think it will be a decision that makes or breaks the experience for a lot of people. And I will explain why. I know that a lot of you, and myself included, when I pick up a game like this, the first thing I do is to crank it up to the maximum difficulty. This is because I like playing the games in a more challenging setting, I like to have some more fun with them, and I also like them to last a little bit longer. All of these are usually accomplished by higher difficulty settings. So naturally I went for unfair. And when I clicked this, I got this warning here saying playing on hard or unfair modes requires substantial skills at CRPGs, a vast knowledge of Pathfinder system, and sometimes a sheer amount of luck with the dice rolls. Choose them at your own peril. So what I thought when I saw this was, okay, the game is giving a warning for casual players that this may be a little bit too hard for them. But, you know, me being, everybody has this idea sometimes, I've played these games before, I know how to handle this, so I'll be fine. So I just pressed OK and I went with it. And I cannot stress this enough, that the message you see on this left screen here is that hard, at least hard and unfair, are really not recommended for new players. Okay? It's called hard and unfair for a real reason in this game. And the reason why that is because a lot of the difficulty in the game is already front-loaded. There's basically no difficulty curve. The way that the game does the difficulty is by adding a lot of bonuses, stacking bonuses on your enemies. So their ability scores, stuff like strength, dexterity, constitution, stuff like that, they will be very, very high. Their armor class will be very, very high. The attack bonus they have, same thing. Damage, you take double damage on unfair. So if you try to play unfair and you don't know about this game, I can pretty much assure you, you will not be able to finish the tutorial. I bashed my head against unfair for a couple of days, I gave it up, I went to hard, I beat the tutorial, I went to the first part of the game and I gave it up. I pretty much said, okay, this is dumb, this is stupid, the game is poorly made, and, it's just not meant for a new player. Playing on hard or unfair, in my opinion, requires a substantial amount of experience with Pathfinder. It requires a lot of metagaming knowledge. You basically have to know the game by memory, from start to finish, so that you know what you are up against and you can prepare accordingly. And you also have to know how to build your character, because you really need to have a character that performs very well right from the start of the game. So those builds that you may see on some sites or some guides that show you like, oh my god, I dealt 300 damage at level whatever, they might not be very strong at the start. And those would basically not be viable for these difficulties from the start of the game. So again, my suggestion for a new player would be to play on the normal difficulty setting. If you are someone that has a lot of experience with classic RPGs and you don't mind a little bit of trial and error and maybe some frustration, feel free to start on challenging, but anything above that, you have been warned, it's pain and suffering. Okay, so with difficulty out of the way, we are going to go into our character screen. So I'm also putting this as a top priority, because one of the things that may happen when you pick up the game and you go to start it is you pick your portrait, then you have these races, which aren't that many, and you may feel, okay, there's a bunch of things here to take into consideration, a lot of different feats, it changes my attributes and whatnot, but for the most part it's not that overwhelming. But then you come to your class choices, and here you have a lot of them. Some of them you can pick, others you can't pick. They have prerequisites. And if you pick something like Kineticist, the game will just give you a brief preview of how this class, levels up, the class progression. And it's not unusual for one to, spend a lot of time on this screen, because there's just so much to try and understand and try to figure out, how this class plays out, how this class progresses from level 1 to level 20. And here is when things start getting very, very overwhelming. So, my topic here would be classes that I consider to be good choices for new players. I actually made a list before I looked at what was over here. And here the game suggests a fighter, a paladin, a ranger, a sorcerer, and a cleric. And I will say that these three right here were also my three top picks before seeing this screen for new players. I think that a fighter, a paladin, or a ranger are very good choices for new players. I would not suggest a sorcerer for the simple reason that the way that sorcerers get their spell selection will not be obvious for new players, and it will be very easy for you to make a mistake as you level up. Sorcerers can only pick spells when they level up. They cannot learn them from scrolls. They can only select a select few from every spell level, and you cannot swap them back later. Okay, so I would not suggest a sorcerer for someone that does not know this game and does not know the spells and how they work yet. Cleric might not be too bad of a choice, but the reason why I don't suggest this is because clerics tend to fall more on the support side of things, more of a supportive role. And I know that for a lot of people, that's not really what you want out of your main character. You typically want your main character to be someone that has a powerful impact in combat encounters. Especially someone that can, you know, withstand damage and deal damage, or just deal a lot of damage or cast powerful spells. So these two, for the following reasons, I would not recommend. Now, I'm gonna go for the custom character creation, and I will also go through these here. So, my suggestions, and I'm gonna go by the ones that the game also suggests, would be a fighter. The fighter is a martial class. It's pretty much a class that's familiar for you to play with. It's a character where you want to put on some armor, put on the best weapon you find, or maybe a weapon and a shield, and you go and bash enemies over the head. The class progression, even though you may see a lot of symbols over here, is actually quite simple. It's quite linear, and the gameplay itself is not too hard. Okay, so it's a class that you definitely can pick up and easily start playing with. My second one, which is actually what I consider to be the absolute best new player beginner class, is the Ranger. So a Ranger, especially if you make him an archer with a longbow, or a composite longbow I should say, is I think the best first choice for a new player. The reason for that is kind of similar to the fighter. It's a martial class. The way it levels up is very simple, very easy to understand how it works. At level 4, you also get an animal companion, which is cool, and it also helps you out a lot. It can tank for you, it can deal damage, it can even just take the attention from the enemies away from you or your party while you are safely, some distance away and just shooting into your enemies. It's a class that can deal a lot of damage. It's safe to play, and it's also easy to play. Third suggestion would be a paladin. Where are they? Again, paladins, martial class once again. They have some divine spellcasting, which is cool. They have some abilities like, for example, Smite Evil and Mark of Justice that make you and or your party especially strong versus evil enemies. And they have a little bit more of a utility while still being a somewhat simple class to play and straightforward. They also have some bonus points for being lore friendly, usually for first playthroughs when people tend to play as a good character. Paladins tend to play as lawful good, so I think it's a good choice. And then, if you want to play around with arcane magic, I would suggest a wizard. So like I mentioned before with the sorcerer, the plus for the wizard is that a wizard can learn spells every time he levels up, and he can also learn spells by reading scrolls that you find throughout the game. So basically a wizard can learn every single arcane spell that the game has, and then he can choose and prepare them however you see fit. The spells you like the most, the spells you find most effective, you can prepare them at will. Well, you have to rest in order to use them later, but you can choose whichever spells you want to play with and use them in your adventures without ever feeling locked or restricted like the sorcerer does. So it's the best class to play around with arcane magic and get to know and learn how to use the spells, how they feel, if they are useful or not. Very good class for that purpose. If you want some bonus suggestions, I have here, I would go for example for a Mad Dog Barbarian. It's a class to pick up a two-handed weapon, especially if it has reach, move into the enemies and bash them over the head, and you also get an animal companion to help out. And my final suggestion is the Alchemist Vivisectionist. So this is a class that has a little bit more going on. It can also be a martial class. It has sneak attacks, like a rogue. It has the mutagen, which can help you increase your stats. It's very useful. And you can also play around with some medical discoveries that will give you extra feats, or just, you know, new stuff to play around with. He can also learn some arcane spells, and he is very good in terms of buffing the party with all sorts of beneficial effects. Very strong class as well, and easy to play. Something to know as well, I have this other topic here, about pure classes versus multi-classes. I would say that for a new player, I would always suggest a pure class. What I mean by pure class is that you can see when you pick a class here, the game will show you the class progression. It will show you exactly what you get on every single level. Okay, so you can know what you learn. And if you pick at level 1, let's say, going back to the example of the Ranger, if you choose Ranger when you start the game, when you play a little bit and when you gain sufficient experience to level up, you are not obligated to put, you know, more points into Ranger. You can actually start getting points in other classes. So there's nothing stopping you from creating a level 1 Ranger and then putting points in, for example, Rogue or a Wizard or whatever you may find fun. The reason why I say that this is not advised is that there's a lot of nuance and a lot of little things that may not be obvious to you when you start playing the game, and by multi-classing you will likely be creating a worse character than you would if you just kept progressing in your main class. There's stuff like base attack bonus, there's stuff like pet progression, spell level progression, spellcaster level, spell difficulty class. All those things are relevant, especially when you're trying to multi-class, and that's something that's really not very obvious when you start playing the game. I'm not going to be delving into that right now. I don't think it makes sense for this guide. I would say that keeping your class pure will likely be the best option for a first playthrough. Also to note, all of the classes that I suggested, so the Fighter, the Ranger, the Paladin, the Wizard, the Mad Dog Barbarian and the Vivisectionist Alchemist, are all classes that play out very well if you simply keep them pure. You will have a very decent character capable of overcoming any challenge in the game, especially on the lower difficulties like normal or challenging. So that's my suggestion for pure versus multi-classing. My next topic will be about race selection. This will be somewhat of a short topic. The only thing I will have to say here is, when you are taking into consideration the race that you want to play, well, naturally, there's always the fun factor, right? If you like short people, a dwarf, a gnome, or a halfling are cool choices. But do keep in mind the things that you are gaining and the things that you are losing. So, for instance, a dwarf makes for a good cleric. He has some more points in constitution, some more points in wisdom. I will also explain this in a little bit. On the other hand, they will never be very charismatic, okay? This might not mean a lot to you right now, but I just want you to keep in mind the things that you get and the things that you may lose. And every class has something of this sort, okay? Even the human that looks like it doesn't gain anything, he does. He gets a +2 to an ability score, he gets an extra feat, and he also gets an additional skill point at the first level, and yada yada yada. So keep in mind what these have, and once we learn a little bit more about the abilities, you can choose the class that makes more sense to you. So just as also a brief example here. Yeah, so let's take into consideration, for example, the gnome. The gnome gets a bonus to Constitution and to Charisma, while getting a penalty to Strength. Something that comes to mind when I look at this is, for example, a Sorcerer. The main primary casting stat for a Sorcerer is Charisma. A Sorcerer, typically in the usual sense of a Sorcerer, if you play him as a spellcaster, does not really care for Strength, so this penalty doesn't matter. This bonus is really good, and extra hit points are also good. He also has some bonuses, for example, for Gnome Magic. He has more DC, so bonuses on the difficulty class on any illusion spells that they cast, so you can have more powerful illusion spells, for instance. This could be a good Sorcerer choice. So when you select the class you want to play, try to understand what his main abilities are, and then you can also pick the best race available for it. There's also nothing stopping you from just picking the one you like and playing, okay? But from a performance point of view, choosing a race that adapts well to a class is a good idea. Okay, so right now we're going to be talking about ability points and skill points. Let me just check which class I chose. Yeah, the Ranger. So we have some choices to make here, and these are kind of the, the very familiar ability scores you're accustomed to. So Strength, Dexterity, Constitution, Intelligence, Wisdom, and Charisma. Something to note by these green thumbs up is that the game will actually try to help you selecting the, the things that are good for your character. I'm just gonna go back to human, sorry, I don't want to get this messed up. Okay, so the game right now is suggesting that I put some points into dexterity and some points into wisdom. Now, just to briefly go over this, in a broad sense, strength is something that you really want if you are going to be someone involved in melee, because your chance to hit and the damage you deal with melee weapons by default is governed by your strength score. If we're thinking about dexterity, dexterity is mostly recommended for somebody playing as a ranged character, so shooting from afar with either spells that need to hit the enemy, such as ranged touch attacks, or just using something like a crossbow or a bow or anything like that. It will also make you a little bit more nimble. It will increase your armor class by a little bit. Constitution will give you some more hit points and make you more resilient to certain effects, such as, for example, poison. And now we are gonna go into the brain side of ability scores. Intelligence is the primary casting stat for wizards and alchemists. They will gain bonus spells based on the intelligence score, and they will definitely need at least 10 plus the spell level in order to be able to cast the spells that they know. It will also determine how many points you can allocate in terms of skill points. Wisdom is the primary casting stat for clerics, druids, inquisitors, and rangers. So given that we picked a ranger, since it's our primary casting stat, the game is recommending this, just like dexterity for, shooting a bow. It will also increase our chances of resisting mind-affecting spells. And finally, charisma is the primary casting stat for bards, paladins, and sorcerers, and it will also determine how likely you are to persuade someone in conversation. That's mostly it. Now, also to note is that every single ability score affects a subset of skills. So if you hover over, for example, strength, you will see that athletics gets highlighted. This is because strength will affect your starting athletics skill points. Dexterity affects everything mobility and trickery related. Constitution actually does nothing, which is kind of sad. It only affects your hit points. Intelligence affects your knowledge arcana and knowledge world. Wisdom is lore nature, lore religion, and perception. And finally, charisma is going to be persuasion and use magic device. So for the most part, ability points will be very important for your performance in actual gameplay. So when you are in combat, these will give you several bonuses. And skill points are mostly used for stuff outside of combat, with some exceptions. So stuff like athletics, or for example, let's see, knowledge arcana or knowledge world, you don't use this in combat. This won't make you shoot spells or shoot your bow more accurately or not. These are used for several skill checks that the game will present you throughout the course of the game. And they can also affect other things, like when you are resting, you set up the camp to rest, and every person in the party can have a different role. Like for example, hunting for food is determined by lore nature. The likelihood in which you will be ambushed while you are resting is determined by stealth. You know, perception to see if somebody's coming to attack you, stuff like that. Something that's important to know about this is that even though it doesn't necessarily affect your gameplay performance, one of the things that Pathfinder Kingmaker does is that the experience you get for passing skill checks is very high. A lot of the times, passing a single skill check will give you more experience than actually fighting enemies. So making sure that you have good skill point distribution and that your party, you know, synergizes well with one another. Like for example, you can have someone focus, for example, on these three, and then another person focusing on these. Just try to make sure you have a nice spread of skill checks among your party members, because it can really get you a lot of extra experience that you otherwise would not get. Okay, so basically when you start the game, you can assign some points, and for a ranger, I can even just simulate here what I would do. I would use dexterity as my racial bonus from a human, assuming I'm taking a human, and I would take something like this. 14 points over here, 12 here, maybe like 14 over here. It's nice and even. The reason why I'm doing this as an example for the ranger is, since we're going to be shooting a bow, I want my dexterity to be as high as possible, because it will increase my chances to hit. Composite bows actually use strength as well for some bonus in terms of damage, so a little bit of strength is not bad. Constitution, you know, you want more hit points if possible, but since you are playing from the back line as a ranged character, you don't need that many. In terms of intelligence, we don't cast with intelligence and we don't really need many skill points, so 10 is perfectly fine. Wisdom, 14 for some spell casting ability. He's not like a very heavy spellcaster, it's mostly on, you know, just to complement his skill set. And then charisma, again, doesn't do much for him. If you want to min-max, you could also do something like this and increase your strength score. You know, whatever you might want to do, it's possible, but this would just be a very, well, new player-friendly stat distribution that works out quite well. In terms of skill points, usually you can put in whatever you feel is lacking in your party, or whatever you feel makes sense for your character at the start. So for instance, the game is showing me the class skills, because every single class will be proficient in different skills. In the case of the ranger, these are the ones. So for instance, I could put a point in athletics, stealth, nature, perception, and persuasion. So the purpose here would be passing athletics checks, making sure we can be well camouflaged when we are resting or moving through the world to avoid ambushes, be able to fulfill the hunting duty in the party while resting, perception to find traps or hidden objects, and persuasion because it's always nice for the main character to be able to persuade others in dialogue. It's very useful, there's a lot of persuasion checks that give a lot of experience, so I definitely recommend, if you can, have some persuasion on your character. The next topic I have is regarding some of the things that will be very, very important during the entire course of the game. So, the things I want to mention here are going to be base attack bonus, armor class, and saving throws. So these all play a big role in combat. We can actually see a nice explanation here, or a nice summary here. We can see that with our stat distribution, we're getting a +3 attack bonus on our melee attacks, a +5 on our range attacks, and then we can also see our AC down here plus our saving throws. So starting with the base attack bonus. Your attack bonus is essentially your chance to hit your enemies. So like I said previously, everything in the game is based on dice rolls. So what this means is, when you are attacking someone, in this case with a melee weapon like a sword, you roll a 20-sided die. And to that result, you are going to add your base attack bonus. So in this case, if you rolled, let's say, a 10, you would then add a +3, which would mean that your attack roll would be equal to 13. So by attacking and rolling a 13, what this means is if your enemy has an armor class of 13 or lower, you hit them. If their armor class is above 13, you miss. That's the basic of this. The way this works is we can see this +3, but where does this +3 come from? Your bonus attack with your attack bonus with a melee weapon is the following: base attack bonus plus strength modifier plus size modifier. I won't be focusing on size modifier right now, it doesn't really matter for this instance, but you can get spells that increase or decrease your size, and they will affect your chances to hit. Your strength modifier we can very easily see here. Since we have 14, we get a +2 bonus, and you basically get 1 point of bonus for every 2 points of score above 10. Okay, so 11 does nothing, 12 gives you +1, 13 does nothing, 14 gives you +2. So you are getting +2 from over here. The reason why this is a +3 is because your class also gives you attack bonus. So it's not very visible from the get-go here, but if you hover over this level 1, this section here, or if you right-click, you can see the summary of what you get on this level. So you get a +2 to fortitude and reflex saving throws, and you also get a +1 to your base attack bonus. Okay, so essentially 1 level in Ranger gives you 1 base attack bonus, and then 14 strength gives you an additional +2 in your bonus as well, making it be a +3. Same logic for range attacks, although now determining factor is dexterity. So we have a +1 bonus from our class, and then we have a +4 from our dexterity, making it a +5. This is basically how base attack bonus works. I will also say that for a martial character, someone that you want to be attacking with weapons, so like swinging a sword or shooting a bow, stuff like that, you want your attack bonus to be as high as possible. The reason for it is not only does this allow you to hit your enemies better, but it also gives you something else. That I cannot actually focus on this little window that shows up, but let's just read it. The last sentence says, when a creature's base attack bonus reaches +6, +11 or +16, it receives an additional attack when it makes a full attack. So when they say the base attack bonus, it means really your base attack bonus before any other modifiers get added. So as an example, given that the Ranger gets 1 base attack bonus every single level, once you reach level 6, you get a +6 here, so you get an additional attack per turn, which is quite nice. Or actually, sorry, level 6. So you get a +6, so you get an additional attack per turn. And the same thing would happen, I believe, at level 11. We can see here, 3 attacks per turn. and then on level 16 we would get 4 attacks per turn. So a class that has a good base attack bonus progression is usually a good choice for, you know, a martial class to attack your enemies with. You can see this on stuff like a ranger, or for example, I think a paladin, yeah, paladin as well. Fighters, not rogues. Yeah, rogues only get plus 15 when they reach 20. But a fighter will get 20, I believe. Fighter, where are you? Yeah, so plus 20, which means 1 attack bonus per level, because you go from 1 to 20. So this is your attack bonus. Very relevant. Going for the other very relevant part is your armor class. Armor class will determine whether you hit or you miss enemies, and the same thing applies to you, right? Actually, I swapped my class. God damn it. Ranger. Okay. No, stop. Okay, the game was kind of going crazy there. So yeah, armor class determines whether you hit or miss enemies and determines whether you are hit or you can dodge an attack from an enemy as well. The way this works is armor class, or AC for short. You have a base value, you can see here a base value of 10, and then you will add all kinds of different bonuses to this armor class. In this case, we add our dexterity value for our armor class. So 10 plus 4 equals 14. What this means is that for an enemy to hit you, they need to roll an attack and score a value of 14 or higher. If it's anything below 14, they miss and you take 0 damage. If it's anything 14 or above, they will hit and you will take the damage. There are other categories here for armor class. You have flat-footed and you have touch. Starting with flat-footed, what this means is that if you are attacked in some way that you cannot react to, any dexterity bonus you have does not apply. In this case, your AC is calculated without adding your dexterity bonus. That's why it's 14 over here, plus 4 from dex. Flat-footed is 10. Flat-footed is, the most common example is if you are attacked in a fight that you still have not had a chance to act yet. Because the game plays in turns and rounds, and there's also initiative to determine which character acts first. And if somebody has a higher initiative than you, they can attack you before you have a chance to react. That would mean that you would be flat-footed and your defenses would be lowered. On that same note, if you are able to attack your enemies before they have a chance to react, with something like, for example, a charge action, I will go into that later, you can exploit their flat-footed vulnerability. You will attack a lower armor class than otherwise you would in just normal combat. Touch attack is, again, very similar to AC, but it is calculated in a different way. Okay, so we can see here that certain attacks completely disregard armor, including any shields and natural armor. So bonuses from these kinds of things, like armor, are not taken into account for your touch AC. You don't have to worry about this too much. All you have to know is that for the most part, touch AC on every single character in the game, be it your characters or enemies, is usually lower than regular AC. For some cases it will be kind of similar, in other cases it will be a very big difference. So as a quick example, you might find yourself in your adventure and you have to fight a very heavily armored fighter enemy. His AC may be a very high number. It may seem insurmountable for your party to actually get through that AC. However, his touch AC might actually be quite weak. So instead of trying to brute force your way through his AC or just fishing for critical hits, you can try to use other things that target touch AC, such as very different spells. There are melee touch attack spells. There are certain abilities for certain classes that can turn that attack roll into a touch attack, or also ranged touch attack spells. There are several ways that you can exploit this, and what's important for you to know is when you are playing, looking at your enemies, inspecting your enemies, try to understand what they are weak to and go for that. On that same note, we also have our saving throws. So this is all very similar to Dungeons & Dragons. You have Fortitude, Reflex and Will saving throws. These are essentially your defenses against mostly certain abilities and spells. So again, as an example, if somebody targets you with a sleep spell, which is a mind affecting spell, the way you defend against it is by using your Will saving throw. So you roll a d20 again, and then you add your Will saving throw bonus, and if what you roll is above the difficulty class of that spell, you resist the spell and you are not affected. If you roll below, then you are affected. There are spells and abilities that target any of these, and much like I said for AC, one useful tip for dealing with enemies is looking at their saving throws. You might have, let's say, an enemy that has a lot of fortitude saves, so attacking him, for example, with poison might not be a very good choice, because poison attacks fortitude, but at the same time, they might have a very low will score, so you can attack him with something like sleep, or hideous laughter, or phantasmal killer, stuff like that. So inspect your enemies, learn their weaknesses, and target them accordingly. That is the key to success for a lot of very different fights. My next topic will be party composition. So in this game, much like, the old school classic RPGs, your party size is composed of 6 people. So you can have your main character and up to 5 companions. You can play with a full party, or you can play with a reduced party, or even as a solo character. My recommendation for a new player is to play with a full party. The reason for it is, by having more characters in your party, you can fulfill more roles, you can support the team better by having more spells, more abilities, more items being put to use than you would otherwise have with lesser people. So if you are playing like a solo character, let's say a ranger, then you would really never have access to arcane magic. And arcane magic is very powerful. That would be a reason all by itself to have something like a wizard in your party. At the same time, if you are playing a ranger with a bow, you don't really have a lot of defensive capabilities. So maybe having a fighter to be your frontline tank would be a nice idea. And I can extrapolate even further. So my recommendation, my suggestion would be to play with a full party, and the party composition should be something like the following. I would suggest 2 frontline characters able to have defensive capabilities. So for example, heavily armored characters, or characters that have a lot of defensive buffs, be it through abilities or through spells, would be a good contender for a frontline character. Something like a paladin, or for example a fighter, would be, nice and easy choices for a frontline. I would always recommend playing with a cleric in your party, because clerics bring a lot to the table in terms of supporting your party and also healing your party. And especially early on, you will take damage, from a lot of different sources, and having a way to heal that damage is very, very handy. So clerics have healing spells, they have support spells, buffs, debuffs, they also have channel positive energy, which is very cool. It's just an ability that heals in an AoE, very, very handy. They also have certain domains that give them extra abilities, and just to show a little bit of the potential here, just choosing something random. Spells, there we go. So right from the start, a level 1 cleric will have something like a debuff for your enemies in the form of Bane. You have Bless, with buffs, which buffs your attack rolls and saving throws against fear, for example. You have healing spells. You have remove and suppress fear, remove sicknesses. You have something to increase the AC of your characters, making them more tanky, suppress mind-affecting spells. Just basically a full kit to support your entire party, plus healing. So very, very highly recommended to have a cleric, a pure cleric, so all levels in cleric, in your party. Besides the cleric, I would also always recommend an arcane caster. So this could be a wizard or a sorcerer. For the reason I mentioned earlier, I think a wizard is a better choice for a first playthrough because you can play around with your spells a little bit more. And the reason for it is because he has access to arcane magic. And he has access to arcane magic up to the highest possible level of spells, which is level 9. Arcane magic is very, very powerful. It can give you personal buffs to protect your own wizard. It can buff your companions with defensive buffs, making them more resilient. It can buff your companions with stat increasing spells or spells that basically just make them better at performing their role, like making a fighter attack better or making a fighter be better protected. It can also just give general buffs like haste, which is very, very good. It can debuff your enemies with, as an example, the opposite of haste, you have slow, or grease or sleep or whatever you might want. So you can debuff your enemies, and you also have access to very offensive magic. So your typical stuff like magic missiles, fireballs, lightning bolts, chain lightning. So someone with access to arcane magic can really do a lot of different things, and they will all benefit you throughout your adventure. So these, I would say, would be your 4, core people to have. And then you would have 2 extra that you have a little bit more freedom to play around with. My personal suggestion would be someone that's like a pure damage dealer. As an example, the ranger. Just someone dishing out as much damage as possible and killing your enemies as fast as possible. And finally, I would add a class that's able to deal damage and also provide utility. In this case, I would suggest a bard or an alchemist. They are both very, very good at buffing your party. In the case of the bard, different auras, a lot of different spells. They can also dish out damage. So, really good class. And this would be an example of a 6-man party that would be very, very well suited to finish up the game without many issues. On to turn-based versus real-time. One thing that Pathfinder does very well, especially because there's a lot of division between players there's a lot of division among players over what is the best system, either turn-based or real-time with pause. Everybody's gonna have their preference. What I will say is that for a new player, I would likely say that turn-based is the better option. And the reason for it is that when you are playing in turn-based, you can understand a lot better what's going on. Because every single action that is taken during the course of a combat, you will see it happen individually. In fights that involve a lot of different people, so you can already think about your party of 6, and let's say you are fighting, 5 or 10 enemies, it's very easy to lose track of what's going on. Who's attacking who, what spells are being cast, stuff like that. It can get very chaotic very quickly. So by playing in turn-based and having everything taken, step by step, it's easier to get a grasp on understanding what's happening and how the game plays out. I would say that later on, once you start getting a better feel for the game, on the easier fights, the fights where you're just fighting like a bunch of kobolds or bandits or stuff like that, you can just swap it to real-time with pause and just let the game flow, which, flows naturally, it flows faster, and it might even be a little bit more fun because it's more explosive in the way that things are happening. And when you find something that you don't really understand, like, for example, a boss fight, you might not be understanding why you aren't being able to do damage, or why your spells aren't hitting, stuff like that, you can swap to turn-based and just try and figure it out that way. because one thing you can do in this game that you cannot do in others is that you can swap between real-time with pause and turn-based at will. At any given time, you just press a button and the game swaps, even during combat. So it's very, very handy, and I would recommend newer players, while you are trying to understand the game, turn-based is likely the better option, at least for the start. So, for another topic, and we're now in the gameplay, the action scene, I want to talk a little bit about party positioning. So this is relevant basically all the time that you are playing in the game world, is the positioning of your characters. I just loaded a very old save game that I had here, and I actually think I have pretty much the lineup I was mentioning on my recommended party composition. So I didn't know what I was doing back here, except for spells. I think my spells were horrible, but let's not look at that right now. So basically, I have two frontliners in the form of Valerie and Rigongar. So she is a fighter, he is a magus, capable of defending himself with protective spells. Then I have my pure cleric in the form of Harem. I have myself as a sorcerer goat. He's just a pure sorcerer, arcane caster. We have Lindsay as a bard to deal some damage and also support the party. And we have Amiri as our pure DPS as a second row damage dealer. So yeah, pretty good lineup right here. Also something to note on that regard is that the game does offer you a very good option in terms of available story companions to go through the game and have what you need to succeed. Okay, so your companions are actually quite nice. But what I wanted to mention here is party positioning. So what you usually want to do is have your frontliners, so your more defensive characters in the front. You will want to have the squishy characters in the back, and the rest kind of in between, or even something like this if you wanted to. Now, by default, what the game does is it creates this formation where you're basically in pairs, and this formation follows the lineup over here. So you can see here 1, 2, so the front line, they're getting highlighted. So Valerie, Rigongar in the front line, then Amiri and Harem on the medium line, and then the back line is my sorcerer and Lindsay. Now, you are not forced to play in this formation, especially if you have pets in your party. This will not be very useful. So what you can do is you just press this button here for the formations, and you can choose 1 out of 3 custom formations, and you can make them however you want. So you could do something like, for example, let's say that in your front line, one of your characters is a lot tankier than the other, maybe because it's early game or because you just built it that way. You could use the formation to do something like this. So, for instance, if Valerie is a lot better armored than Rigongar, you could leave Rigongar a little bit back, or even just like something like this. And the purpose of this is quite simply to, when you are engaging in combat, ideally you want your more armored characters to take the attention of the enemies. So if you move this way, it is more likely that the enemies will meet Valerie when they rush towards her, and vice versa, than they will Rigongar. So they will focus more on her rather than him, making him safer and making her the center of attention, which is what you want. For the rest of this, you could do something like, okay, so we want Amiri swinging from behind the front line by being like enlarged or with a reach weapon. You could put a little bit behind them, and then your backline can be a safe ways away, something like this. And you would have, a good enough party positioning for what you need. Tankier character in the front, your off tank just beside them, and then your second row attacker right behind both of the frontliners and your backline back here. So keep in mind that formations exist and that you can use them in this way. Something else that I think is worth mentioning, and this is actually very, very important for general fighting purposes. Let's pretend here that my friend Sorcerer Goat is an enemy spellcaster, and the same thing can be said about, for example, Rigongar and or Harem. Okay, so these are our friends, this is our party, and these are enemies. When you are about to start a fight, if you simply walk up to the enemies, you basically have an aggro range, which is a range in which your enemies will turn hostile and the combat starts. So if you just walk up to them, the fight will naturally start, initiative will be rolled, which is just basically something that's used to determine who will act first. Maybe it's easier to think if you were playing in turn-based mode. So for instance, if you came up to the enemies and the combat started, every single person would roll initiative. And as an example, let's say that Valerie would roll a 20, and Harem would roll a 1, Rigongar would roll a 2, and Amiri would roll a 3. What that would mean would be that since Valerie rolled the highest score, a 20, she gets to act first. Then Amiri would act as the second highest roll, then Rigongar with a 2, and finally Harem with a 1. And naturally, you want to act as soon as possible, because like we discussed in terms of AC, for example, if you can target the flat-footed AC of an enemy, it's much easier to hit them than if you are targeting regular AC. More so on certain characters than on others. Don't really have a perfect example here, but you can see a difference. It's much more relevant between AC and touch. So if you manage to win the initiative roll, you attack first, that's good. Or you can cast a spell first, that's also very good. And you also don't want your enemies to attack you first, because then they are attacking your flat-footed AC, they can disable you with spells before you have a chance to act, etc, etc. So acting first is good. So relying on initiative is a little bit too random and unpredictable. It's a dice roll. You have some stuff that can help you increase your initiative, like increasing your dexterity score and some feats, but for the most part it is a little bit random. The other way you can do this is, while you are still outside the aggro range of the enemies, you can actually use the charge action. The charge action will basically make you charge a specific enemy, and you will run at double speed, and as soon as you reach them, you will attack them, regardless of initiative. So basically what this means is that you can essentially get like a surprise attack when the fight starts. Because since you charge, as soon as you start charging, when you enter the aggro range, the combat will start, but you are already charging. At least this is how it works in real time with pause. I think turn-based is a little bit weird with this, but yeah, in real time, when you charge, combat starts, but you're already charging. So when you reach your enemy, you will immediately attack them before they have a chance to react, and then initiative gets rolled. So it would not be uncommon for you to charge and also win the initiative, which would mean you would basically be attacking him twice before he could act. This is very, very powerful, especially if you can do this for priority targets. So in this case, not only are we getting the extra attack, but we can also notice this here, which I think is relevant to note. Abilities, charge. It will also give you a +2 bonus on the attack roll, although you do take a penalty to your AC. Okay, that's something to keep in mind. But you have a better chance to hit the enemy because you are targeting flat-footed AC, and you even get a bonus to your attack roll and a bonus attack on top of it. So charge is a really cool way to begin an encounter. The other really useful use of the charge action is, let's say we have Valerie engaged in combat with these two resilient fighters, but the enemy has this spellcaster casting nasty spells at our party. So typically the people in the back line are going to be more problematic than the people in the front line. That's my experience. So instead of trying to kill these two first, what you could do is with another character, for instance, like, you know, your second roll damage dealer, you could kind of try to get a line of sight away from the melee combatants, such as like this, and instead of engaging with these enemies, you would just charge the back line. You need to have a clear line of sight. I think right here it doesn't work because of the rocks. Let me just see here. But yeah, over here it would work. So, while this spellcaster was casting the spell, for instance, you could just very quickly charge him and give him a nice hit in the face. You might even interrupt the spellcast. You can outright kill them. And you know, a melee fighter in the face of a spellcaster or an archer is very, very annoying for them. Because, and I guess I can introduce this other mechanic here as well, this game has attacks of opportunity. So what this means is, if you are in the threat range, let's call it this, the threat range of an enemy, which is essentially the area in which they can strike with their weapon, by moving into that area, nothing happens. But if you move away from the threat range, you will trigger an attack of opportunity and the enemy will attack you for free. Even if it's not their moment to attack in the turn. Okay, so it's basically a free attack. Not only does that happen when you move away from enemy combatants, it will also happen every time that you cast a spell or that you shoot a ranged weapon. That's why I say that having a melee fighter on top of a wizard or an archer is a very powerful thing, because if this enemy tried to cast a spell, a melee would chop his face off, which is very, very bad. And if an archer tries to shoot, it would again trigger attack opportunity and also attack him for free. So do be careful if you are engaged in melee about moving out, and keep in mind that you can trigger these free attacks if you bring someone on top of enemy spellcasters or enemy archers. It's one of the best ways you have to deal with these kinds of enemies. Something else that's very noteworthy, and I think is relevant to mention, is that you should not ignore consumables in this game. I know that for a lot of games, especially RPGs, players have the habit of not really caring too much about purchasing consumables from merchants because, you know, at least I think I'm gonna do just fine with what I pick up from the world or with the spells that my characters currently have, and I don't have to spend money on consumables, you know, from merchants. That is not really the case for Pathfinder. Especially in the early game, there are some things that can be very, very useful for you and that you cannot get from your characters. So, just as an example here, in Pathfinder, very early in the game, you will encounter some enemies which are able to poison your party members if they hit them with an attack. Poison is a very, very annoying mechanic to deal with, especially early on, because it's a debuff that gets applied to you and it will start slowly draining your stats. So it will drain your strength score or your agility score or constitution, and it will just keep on draining it until you are cured or until you rest. And resting sometimes is not exactly free. You may need to use some camping supplies, or you might be making yourself susceptible to an ambush, or you might even just not be able to rest in a given area. So having to deal with stuff like poison and diseases is a very big hassle. And in the very early game, you may reach those enemies without a way to prevent poison at that point. You might not have the spells for it when you reach those enemies. However, you may find clerics, you know, through your adventure like this guy here, that will come to OLX trading post at the start and that they will sell you scrolls. There are scrolls, there are potions, there are many types of consumables. But in this example, you have something like a scroll of Delay Poison Communal. It's a scroll that costs you 375 gold, so it is a little bit. But for 1 hour, your entire party becomes totally immune to poison. So something that could cause you a lot of grief and a lot of frustration in that particular cave with a lot of poisonous enemies, you completely negate all of that hassle just by having a Scroll of Delay Poison Communal in your backpack. So you don't have to worry about spending Scrolls of Restoration or spells or camping supplies in order to rest and cure the stat drains. You just make yourself immune preventively and you're done. And this can be applied to a lot of things, like you take some damage throughout your travels. Your cleric can only heal you a certain amount of times. Why not, for example, purchase some Scrolls of Cure Light Wounds? These only cost 25 gold each, and they do heal for a decent amount. You can use them in combat and you can use them outside of combat. It's an easy way to top up your friends before the next fight, instead of having to rest again. So don't ignore consumables. There are very useful scrolls. There are very useful potions that can give you very powerful buffs equivalent to mage spells that you might not have at the time, and they will increase the performance of your party. So do keep an eye out for what the merchants are selling. There's really a lot of stuff. Something that immediately comes to mind are Scrolls of Healing. They will allow you to get some sustainability. Scrolls of Delay Poison, very important early in the game. Scrolls of Protection from Fire. There are certain enemies that will like to cast something like fire bombs or even fireballs early in the game, and if you don't have protection or resistance from these elements, those fights might even seem impossible, and the simple scroll will just break the fight right open. Okay, you are being targeted with a lot of fear effects. A Scroll of Remove Fear, 25 gold. You've been cursed. You have a Scroll of Remove Curse. Sickness, paralysis, all that kind of stuff can usually be dealt with scrolls if you need them. So do not ignore your merchants. Do not ignore their consumables. So that guy sells scrolls. This guy, for example, sells potions early on. Make sure to see what they have. It might help you. Another example that was more of an issue in the earlier versions of the game were swarms. It's a type of enemy that you can't really do a lot of damage with weapons, but they are vulnerable to splash attacks, like fire attacks. An Alchemist's Fire Bomb does just that, and it only costs you 20 gold. So yeah, do keep an eye out for consumables. So something that I also want to touch on is regarding spells. So how do you learn spells and how do you prepare and use spells? This is something that usually comes up on pretty much any CRPG. So the way you do this, I'm just doing a level up here to exemplify on one of my wizards. So okay, let's just ignore this for the time being. This doesn't matter for right now. In the level up, you may get an option to select new spells. So essentially, if you are playing with a divine spellcaster, mostly clerics, for instance, they will immediately get access to all of the spells available for a given level, but an arcane caster does not. He will either learn it from level ups only, like a sorcerer, or he may also learn it from scrolls such as a wizard. So in this case, we're doing the level up. We are going to get 2 new spells to pick from. So the way that you learn spells and you use them is, in this case, I want to learn, let's say, Bull Strength, and I want to learn Burning Arc. So I would select these 2 for my level up, and I would complete my level up. This does not mean that right now I am able to cast those spells. I don't even have my level 2 spell slot or my spell list available over here. The way you have to do this is, you have to open your inventory or just press the hotkey for the spellbook, which is B. But if you open your inventory, you will see at the top here the spellbook. You will have to come to the appropriate level that you want. In this case, I'm going to use the example of level 2. And you will see that your spells, well, your spells learned are the ones over here. But your spells memorized are the ones in these slots. So essentially what this means is that at this moment, Octavia knows how to cast Bull Strength and Burning Arc, but she hasn't actually memorized them yet. So if you actually want to use these spells, you would have to either, drag and drop, or you can just double click the spells into the slots, and you'll notice that they are kind of grayed out. If we compare, for example, for level 1, here you can see as well, like this one has a, heavy color, this is grayed out. This means that these spells are not ready yet. So in order to be able to cast these spells again, you would need to rest. So if you rested, all of the currently grayed out spells would be now in, their full color, and they would be available for you to cast. So you can basically swap these around anytime that you want, but if you want to have them ready, you need to rest in order to be able to cast them. So that's how you learn spells. The other way would be to, open your inventory, see if you have any scrolls, and see if you can actually learn them. So if you right-click on a scroll, if it shows up right here, copy to spellbook, you can do this. And now if I open my spellbook, I will see on level 1, she now also learned how to cast Ear-Piercing Scream, and it is now available for me to slot into my memorized spells. So that's how you learn and how you prepare spells. And we are back in Octavia's spellbook. So I actually just loaded the game so that I can show something else that's very relevant. So early on in the game, you may notice that your spellcasters are not exactly dealing a lot of damage. This is not because you built your character wrong or anything like that. It's just that spellcasters early on are not capable of dealing a lot of damage. They don't have access to particularly offensive spells, and the ones that they do have access to are not particularly powerful. So, as an example, we can look over here at level 1. We have Magic Missile, which I wanted to open up the description. Thank you. This spell will deal 1d4 plus 1 points of force damage. So it deals anything between 2 damage up to a maximum of 5 damage. That is not very impressive. If we look at, for example, our fighter, and just look at the basic weapon, just a regular basic auto attack will deal 1d10 damage. And this is just for a normal auto attack that doesn't spend any resources. In the case of a spellcaster, not only are you dealing a very low amount of damage with your spell, but you also have to spend one of your memorized spell slots, which, as you know, is kind of a limited amount. So it's a precious resource that you don't want to spend, for nothing. So early on, what I think has more value for you, and what I would recommend that you pick in terms of your spell selection, is not going for, or not just going for offensive spells, but take into consideration what I call the control spells. So spells that may not deal any kind of damage, but will help your party in other ways. For example, Grease is pretty much the best spell you can pick up at level 1 with a wizard or a sorcerer. This covers a solid surface with a layer of slippery grease. Any creature in the area when the spell is cast and every round after that must make a successful reflex save or fall prone. So this doesn't deal any damage, but it can take several enemies out of the fight. So not only are you disabling them by making them fall prone, but you are also allowing your allies to take free hits at them while they are lying down and they cannot fight back. So something like this would be a lot more valuable early on than just dealing, you know, between 2 to 5 damage. And also something that's relevant is that control spells are useful pretty much the entire game, and they are particularly useful early on, while, you know, offensive spells typically scale as you level up, making them more useful eventually. So I'm not saying that level 1 offensive spells are horrible, but if we look a little bit as an example here at Magic Missile, Jesus, game, right here, sorry, we can see it deals low damage, but if we look a little bit further down, we can see here, for every 2 caster levels beyond first, you get an additional missile. So you shoot 2 missiles at level 3, 3 at 5, 4 at 7, and a maximum of 5 at 9th level or higher. So you're not just dealing between 2 and 5 damage, you are actually doing that times 5 at level 9. So this went from a kind of not very interesting spell at all to an actually useful spell. So take into consideration what I said. You are not expected to deal a lot of damage with spellcasters very early in the game. That's just how the way it works. Consider taking something that controls the battlefield. Color Spray is also a good choice. It can blind, stun, and even possibly prone enemies. You have stuff like Sleep that can put enemies to sleep. It will even prime them for instant kill effects if you use a Coup de Grace. There's a lot of good stuff in terms of controlling the battlefield, which is much more useful than trying to deal pitiful damage early on. The other consideration that I want to discuss when thinking about spells is the fact that they might or not require an attack roll in order to hit your enemies. So looking at an example here for Scorching Ray. This spell will shoot a beam of fire, and if we notice here, each ray requires a ranged touch attack to hit and deals a certain amount of damage. What this means is, even if you use up this spell, so you are casting, you are spending a spell slot, targeting an enemy, it does not guarantee that the spell will actually hit. This can be, you know, annoying, frustrating. You just spent a spell and your whole round to not even hit. And, you know, it's more likely to happen early on when you still don't have a lot of attack bonuses, which you do need to overcome the enemies, in this case, touch AC. And sometimes it might be problematic to, you know, hit enemies with this kind of spell. However, if we look at other spells, and going back to the example of Magic Missile, and why this is actually a great spell, so not only does he scale with levels, so it's a good thing actually, but if we rewrite here, the missile strikes unerringly. This means that this spell can never miss. If the enemy has 20 AC, 50 or 200, it does not matter. This will always land. So spells such as this are very, very useful to have in certain fights where you find an enemy where it seems like his armor class is an insurmountable amount and nobody in your party can overcome that because your attack bonus just isn't up to par at that point. Consider spells and abilities that do not miss your target. So Magic Missile is an example. You have stuff like, for instance, at level 2, Bone Shaker. This is a spell where you target an enemy and it just lands. Burning Arc always lands. A Fireball, for instance, will also always land. Even if the enemies have a chance to resist with a saving throw, they still take half damage. So it might not be all the damage you wanted it to be, but it is guaranteed damage. It can still be completely resisted by spell resistance, but for the most part in Pathfinder Kingmaker, this isn't really much of an issue. So do take into consideration if you find yourself in a situation where you cannot overcome the enemy armor class, or you just really want to make sure that that spell hits, consider spells that never miss. Okay, another important topic that needs to be mentioned for the game is about itemization and stacking bonuses. So for this example, we're going to be looking at one of the very common items that you'll pick up throughout the game, which is a belt. So you will find essentially belts that can give you bonuses to your physical stats, so basically strength, dexterity, and constitution, and you will find helmets that will boost your intellect stats, so intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. Now, there are different bonuses for different things, such as stats, AC, attack bonus, and whatnot, but what is important for you to understand is how they function in conjunction. So, right here we have this belt of giant strength +2, and we have a meaty that currently has some ability damage actually. Let me just take care of that with some potions of restoration. It's the dangers of poison that I spoke about earlier. So yeah, we can analyze her strength score here and we can see that her base value is 16, the modified value, the current value is 18, and the modifier is +4. So +4 is the bonus that she gets, and the enhancement responsible for this difference is this +2 coming from the belt of giant strength +2. Essentially, when you look at your stats, if something is marked as green, it means you are getting a bonus from something else, and if it's marked as red, it's because you probably have some kind of curse or penalty or poison, anything like that. So, in this case, what I want to mention is the way that this stacks. And if we just look at the info here, we can see that the belt grants its wearer a +2 enhancement bonus to strength. Bonuses of the same type usually don't stack. So that is the reason why they mention here the same type. That's the reason why they don't just say a +2 bonus. This is an enhancement bonus. And typically in the game, any kind of bonus of the same type, of the same name, will not stack. There are some exceptions. I don't know if they actually mention it here. For example, for AC, in that if you have dodge bonuses do stack with themselves. But for this example, we see here that the belt is giving us a +2, and we also have a spell here on Octavia, which is Bull Strength, which will, looking at the spell, it will grant the target a +4 enhancement bonus to strength. So if we go a little bit down, we can also see enhancement bonuses do not stack with other enhancement bonuses, for example with bonuses from belts. I imagine that they put this here because this was probably a common point of confusion. And if we look at this, and I buff a meaty with this Bull Strength, we see that she now has the buff. And if we look at her character screen, we can now see that she has a +5 to strength, and the current modifier is, well, the +5, but the enhancement now only mentions this +4 for the Bull Strength. So, given that these kinds of bonuses don't stack, what the game does is simply use the highest value possible. Another example that I can show you, assuming that I have the spell for it. Well, I don't have the spell for it, but maybe I have a potion. Yeah, I have a potion. Amiri is using this Ring of Protection +1. This ring will grant its wearer a +1 deflection bonus to AC. If we hover over our AC, we can see right here we have a dexterity bonus of +1. We have armor, right, from our chainmail, and then we have the deflection bonus from the ring. If we were to buff ourselves with a spell, or for example with a consumable, such as the Potion of Shield of Faith, reading this, we can also see this gives the subject a +2 deflection bonus to AC. Okay, so again, currently she has 18. We can see deflection coming from Ring of Protection, but if she drinks this potion, we now see that it increased by 1, not by 2, even though this gives you 2 AC. And if we inspect, you can no longer see the bonus from the ring because, again, the highest bonus is coming from the Shield of Faith. The same thing applies to many other things. So deflection is a type of AC bonus, and armor is also a type of AC bonus. So in this case, I'm using this chainmail, which gives you a 6 armor class, so 6 base armor class, but she also has these braces of armor +1. This save is a very old save from when I was a newbie. So yeah, these bracers give her +1 armor. Since this is armor and this is armor, they don't stack, and if you look at the bonuses, we don't find the bonus for the bracers. If I took off the armor though, we would now be able to see that she is getting... Oh my god, she was also buffed with mage armor. I really didn't know what I was doing. So I also had given her a buff, the mage armor buff, which gives you a +4 armor bonus to AC, which again was being suppressed because the highest bonus is from the armor and it does not stack. So do keep that in mind, because you might try to do what I was doing here back on this save. Like, I want to give her as much armor as possible, so I will give her this armor, I will give her the bracers of armor, and I will also give her mage armor to get her to a very high amount of AC. It doesn't stack, it doesn't work, so keep that in mind. The other thing that I consider to be very important to discuss, and I think we have some friends here which will help us illustrate what I'm talking about, is that when you are in a combat situation, let's take off turn-based mode, because for this purpose it doesn't really matter. You have the inspect feature, this button right here, which if it's off, if it's disabled, and you mouse over your enemies, you don't really see anything of interest. But if you turn this on, the keybind by default being Y, and you mouse over, you will have a description of that character. You can also right click to make it pop out, and you can see everything about this enemy. Well, not everything, but a lot of important things. You can see his alignment. For example, if you are playing a paladin and you want to smite evil, the enemy does need to be evil for it to work. You can see his classes, it may be relevant. For example, if it said here like 4 levels in wizard, I might prioritize this enemy over a dumb fighter. You can see his stats, so strength, dex, con, everything. You can see how many experience points he's worth, how many hit points he has, damage reduction he might have, in this case he has 2, with some exceptions in cold iron. So this just means that this type of element will bypass any kind of damage reduction. There are many different kinds of exceptions. Some enemies have damage reduction, but if you hit them with fire, it goes through, you know, stuff like that. And very importantly here, you see the hit points, you see the AC, and you also see the saving throws. So all of this information is very, very important to try and understand on how to attack these enemies. So like I've mentioned before, his flat-footed and touch AC are inferior to his normal AC. But what I also meant to show here in this example is that one of the ways, or one of the easier ways to try and bypass AC is, like I mentioned, by stacking bonuses. And a very easy way to obtain a bonus is by flanking your enemies. So I can just keep these people where they are. And we're gonna see here. So Amiri just hit him, dealt 16 damage. And we are going to look at the combat log and try to understand what's happened, right? So we can see the attack roll. I'm going to explain this in more detail somewhere in the video, don't worry. But yeah, we can see the attack roll is higher than the armor class. That means we are hitting. We are hitting flat-footed AC because, like I mentioned previously, if this character hasn't acted yet, you target flat-footed, which is a bonus for you. But what we can see here that's important is this circumstance bonus of +2 by flanking. What this means is that we have more than a single character attacking this enemy. Okay? So if you have more than one character attacking the same enemy, that enemy is counted as being flanked. There are certain exceptions with certain feats, but for the most part this is true for basically everyone. You get a +2 bonus for free, okay? So this is something that you should try to kind of prioritize when you are fighting enemies. If you can have multiple melee characters hitting the same target, it will be beneficial for you. Because if we try to do the same thing on, a different enemy, in this case fighting alone, and we look at how it works, you can see that the attack bonus does not have any kind of flanking bonuses because she was hitting this enemy by herself. So trying to flank your enemies is always a good strategy, not only to gain bonuses from flanking, but also to enable sneak attacks. So if you have a character that has sneak attack, like for example Octavia, she has this by default. Let me see if I can show it. This guy is kind of weak. But I'm gonna try. Ah, she missed. Okay, let's try again. Don't die. Yeah, okay. So yeah, we can see here that Octavia dealt sneak attack damage. She was only able to deal sneak attack damage because that enemy was being flanked. So flanking is an important strategy for combat gameplay. It's very basic to understand, and it's something that, generally speaking, you should try and use against your opposition. Okay, so another topic that I want to cover is about resting. So as you go through the game in your adventures and you'll fight your enemies, you will start, losing health over time. You will start spending your spells to a point where you can't even cast spells anymore, and you will have to rest. So resting will help heal up your characters, be it hit points, some negative conditions like, ability stat damages, poisons and stuff like that. And also, very importantly, it will also restore all of your spells. So in this example, I was playing a little bit in the Old Sycamore Caves, and basically all of my level 1 cleric spells are spent. So in order for me to get them back and also get some HP back is by resting. Something that I'm also going to couple with this topic is about dealing with certain negative conditions. So in this case, past core dump did not take my advice in this guide, and I did not bring a delay poison communal scroll with me when I came to adventure in the Old Sycamore Caves. So this is one of the early game areas where you'll find enemies such as these over here, these centipedes, and if they hit you, they can poison you, such as spiders and stuff like that, and poison will gradually start to damage your ability scores. So right here we have Aram that took 5 dexterity damage, Amiri took 2 strength damage, and Valerie took 10 dexterity damage. This is a lot. So stuff like this will happen throughout the game in many different ways. There are a lot of negative effects, and early on you might not really know how to deal with this. So these are annoying because they will impact your performance. So if we look right here at her armor class, we can see she has a negative bonus to her armor class due to her dexterity score being so drained. Furthermore, if any stat reaches 0, your character will immediately die, even if they are at full HP. So it's something that you have to be very careful about. So, how can we deal with these conditions? If we mouse over here, we can also see this character's ability score is decreased. It can be restored by resting, or with the help of lesser restoration spell, or some more powerful magic. So, just by resting, we can partially heal the damage that was done, but not completely. And we also have some spells which can be useful. So like it said right here, lesser restoration, we actually have some as our level 2 spells for our cleric. So something that we can do is, we can place or we can prepare the spells we want to take. And in this case, I'm preparing 2 lesser restoration spells. And in order to get them back, we are going to rest. So, in order to rest, the only thing you have to do is press this button here that says camp. And you will basically place your camp in an area that is not in a close vicinity to enemies. So if enemies were over here, for example, the game would tell you that you can't place the camp here. You would need to move further back. Now, after placing the camp, you just click on the camp. Your characters will move to their beds. And now you have the camping interface, the resting interface. In this place, you can manage how your characters will act, what their roles will be while camping, if you press manage over here. And you can assign them to specific roles. And furthermore, if you just... can you go away? If you just mouse over your characters, you will see the number over here changing. Well, over here in all of the places. This will basically tell you how good these characters are at those roles. So for instance, Valerie right now would be terrible for camp camouflage, but Octavia is actually quite nice. This is because of her skill points. She has a +10 in stealth, and dexterity, I believe, will also help out a little bit. So in this case, Valerie is at -14 because she has negative dexterity, she's using armor, shield, she's encumbered, all those things. So when you are resting, you can manage your party in the roles that you want them to be in. So, something also important to note when you set up for resting is realizing if you can hunt or if you cannot hunt in a given area. So as an example, since we are in the Sycamore Caves, this is like a dungeon area, you cannot hunt in this area. If you were outside, you could hunt for food and rest, and you wouldn't have any problems, but in here you cannot do it. The way you can get around this is if you have rations. If you have rations, you can eat them, and you eat, you rest, and everything is replenished. If you don't have rations, the only option you have is to skip time, which basically does nothing for you. It will not heal you up, it will not restore any spells. It is very, very bad. So, if you are expecting to go into any kind of dungeon, or just as a general rule of thumb, you should always keep some rations in your inventory. So I'm talking about these items right here. They're actually called camping supplies and rations. You can purchase these, for example, at Oleg's trading post. They are very cheap. And usually what I like to do is I like to always have at least double the amount of camping supplies than I have of party members. So I have 6 party members, I would like to have 12 camping supplies with me. In this case, I've already used it up while I was adventuring over here. So, let's look at the resting here. I want to heal up my HP, I want to heal some of the damage that was done. So I have prepared some lesser restoration spells on my cleric. I will now rest in order to get back my spells. So I will say use rations. Make sure you don't press this button if it says skip time. Make sure you have things working properly, so use rations. And now it says begin resting. Your characters will talk among themselves, that's fine. You can see that we got healed up a little bit. And let's now look. So our HP was brought back to full. We were able to heal almost everyone up. Lindsay was not actually able to go to full HP. If we look at our spells, they have all been replenished. So we can now use them again. And our ability drain was somewhat healed. But as you can see, not by much. We were at -10, we are now at -9. So really the best way to deal with this is by just preventing it with, for example, delay poison. But it does heal a little bit. And then you have stuff like lesser restoration, which you can cast on people that have this stat drain. Come on. And you can see right here that by having a cast, we were able to heal 4 dexterity damage. Now, 4 is not the guaranteed amount. You actually have to roll as well for this. And as it says right here, it will heal you for 1d4 points of temporary ability damage. So, in this case, it rolled high, which worked out fine for us. We can try this again and heal a little bit more. In this case, it was 2. And, well, it wasn't enough to heal everything, but it helped out a little bit. So that's one way to deal with negative conditions, is looking at restoration spells, heal spells. There will also be specific spells for specific conditions, like removing a sickness, or where is it? Maybe it's not level 2. But there's like also, for example, remove blindness, remove paralysis, stuff like that. You do need to pay attention to these spells, as they may be very helpful for dealing with these negative conditions. And also, to bring home the point of consumables are your friends, in this case I don't have any more spells available for level 2, so I cannot cast any more restoration spells from my cleric, but you can also get restoration in the form of, for example, scrolls or even some potions. So in this case, if I wanted to heal up the remaining dexterity point damage, I could just drink a restoration potion. And it rolled a 3, so we got back up to our full amount. And we could do the same thing for Amiri. She has 1 point of negative strength, so I can drink restoration potion. And Harem also has some dexterity damage. I could cast some restoration scrolls. And there we go. So these are the ways that you can deal with negative conditions, and this is also the way that you can rest. Also a quick note on the resting. For example, right now, if I try to rest again, since I no longer have any more rations, I cannot actually rest. So it can be very annoying when you are exploring a dungeon and you can no longer rest. It basically means you might not be able to progress further. You would need to go back to a town, purchase more camping supplies, and then come back. Or in certain situations, like for example this area right here, something you can try to do is to go outside of the dungeon, because typically when you are outside in the wilderness, the game will allow you to hunt. It depends on the area, but you can try it out and see if you are able to do it or not. So in this case, if I try to camp, we can see that we are now able to hunt. Okay, so by managing and placing somebody proficient with hunting, like for example Amiri, now I would be able to hunt. By hunting, I would get the rations necessary to rest and, you know, be able to once again get back into battle. So that's it on resting and dealing with negative conditions. Okay, so a very important aspect also in understanding how to deal with fights is how to keep your characters safe. So like I've mentioned earlier, in the party composition and party positioning, you would typically want to have your highest armored character in the front to take the attention of your enemies. In this case, for example, we have Valerie. She is a 27 AC because she has, you know, heavy armor, a tower shield and whatnot, and she's built to be sturdy. And if we look at Amiri, for instance, she is only at 18, which is much less. So I would prefer my enemies to focus their attention on Valerie, which is harder to hit, than on Amiri. Now, I'm going to demonstrate this here by starting a combat situation. And I don't want turn-based, thank you. And what I mean to show here is actually how to keep your melee characters safe, your DPS melee characters. Because if you are playing with someone like a ranger or a spellcaster, you keep them safe naturally just by being, you know, at range. You are shooting from far away, so you are safer. But if you have to go into melee, you are always kind of in a dangerous situation. The way that you can actually get around that is by using something like a reach weapon. So looking at Harem here, for example, I gave him a long spear. And if you look at the long spear, you can see that it has this right here saying 6 feet in melee. If we compare it, for example, with the heavy mace, this one is only 2 feet. And the same thing if you look at the Miri, her ginormous sword, even though it is ginormous, is still only at 2 feet. And basically any melee weapon is going to be 2 feet, as we can see here, with the exception of weapons which are considered reach weapons. Which is the case of, for instance, a long spear, a bardiche, a glaive, a fauchard, stuff like that. Now, what this enables you is, I'm gonna place Valerie here fighting this enemy. And you can see that they are focusing on her, which is what we want. But now, if I send in someone like Amiri to fight Gatekeeper Quoggy over here, the poor mite, let's see what she does. So she moves in, and she really needs to go right up to the enemies in order to damage this enemy in particular. Which means that if for some reason they swap their attention from Valerie into someone else, they can very easily and very quickly hit Amiri. It's also very easy for Amiri to trigger attacks of opportunity if she tries to move, like for example, go for a different target. So if I wanted to go, let's say over here, she can take attacks of opportunity from these two guys. However, if we look at Harem, I'm gonna do the same thing I did with Amiri. Yeah, so attack of opportunity right there. But here we can see that Harem is able to attack this guy from behind Valerie. This is simply because he is using the reach weapon. This makes it so he is attacking from behind the tank. The enemies don't really have a way to hit him very easily. They would need to move in order to do that. So, generally speaking, he is a lot safer than Amiri was. The other way to also get around this, and I'm gonna try to not kill my enemies here. Let me see if I can do this. Just turn off AI and make everybody stop what they were doing. So you can move back. The other way you can get around this, if you don't have a reach weapon, is you can use something like an enlarge person spell. The enlarge person spell will double the height of its target. And you know, we can read this here a little bit. It will double the height and multiply its weight by 8. So this increase changes the creature size category to the next larger one. You also gain some bonuses and some penalties, but for the time being, I'm only focusing on the reach part of this. So a humanoid creature whose size increases to large has a space of 10 feet and a natural reach of 10 feet. This is the important part of this. So if I were to cast Enlarge Person on Amiri, or if I drink a potion of Enlarge Person, because again, consumables are your friends, we can see what this does. She drinks, she becomes larger. Valerie, don't take critical hits, don't die, I need to demonstrate this. And now, if I once again tell Amiri to go and fight this guy, it's very different from before, right? So before, she had to be like right here, on top of the centipede, right next to him. And right now, she is actually in a safe position hitting from behind the tank. And she can also get away and disengage without triggering attacks of opportunity, except for this guy who moved in, from them because they are not in range. So the best way to keep melee DPS fighters safe, or relatively safer, is by enlarging them or giving them reach weapons. Okay, so something that's also a useful feature that the game offers you is recommended features. So as an example, I'm going to be doing a level up here for Valerie, and What I'm talking about are these, these little green thumbs up buttons that the game will simply use to suggest what would be a good approach to continue, building your character. So what it says right here is a recommended feature is any feature of the character which has the best impact on the character in the current environment. It may be a feature, a spell, or any other character's ability or aspect worth developing first and foremost. Now, this isn't to say that this is the only correct option, and that is not to say that it's even the best one. It might not be the best one. But if you are not really sure where to go with your characters as you level up, you should at least consider the recommended features as somewhat of an indication of what you might want to do. So for this example, I'm keeping my Valerie as a pure class because, again, for new players, I would believe that a pure class is the way to go. So I'm going to be leveling up in the recommended feature, putting more points in fighter. In terms of ability points and skill points, the game again will give you some recommendations. In this case, it's based on your class. Since you are a fighter, it recommends strength and constitution. And it's true, either of these two would be a beneficial improvement. So you could, for example, put one more point in constitution here. You would be doing a good choice. Or you could be putting a point in strength as well. In this case, for instance, you could look at my most beneficial stat increase for this time right now would be constitution, because by going for an even number, you get a bonus to your modifier, while if you go up to an uneven number, it does not increase. But you can also think that further down the line, as an investment for the future, because you will get new ability points as you continue leveling up, you might want to put it in strength instead to continue increasing it later on. But yeah, the game recommends these two, and these are good choices. If you are not sure where to put them on, you can use these as a guide. As for the skill checks, let's note that these are not thumbs up. These are just checks saying that these are class skills. So not the same thing as a recommendation. So here you can honestly just put, if you put on a class skill, you will gain a bonus. So you'll see that you have a +2 by default. And if it's not a class skill and you try to increase it, it goes up by 1. If it's a class skill, it actually went up by 4. If you try to do it again, though, it does not go up by 4 again. Then it starts increasing by only 1. But for this part, it's less relevant. I think where the recommended features really start taking a lot of importance is when you start going for the feat level ups. This is where a lot of people, I believe, can start getting a little bit confused because there's just so much to choose from, especially if you start looking at the unavailable feats. There's just a lot of stuff, and it can get a lot of very overwhelming. So if you are not sure what exactly you should do, again, you can consider the recommended features that the game will suggest for you. In this case, it's suggesting weapon focus to improve a little bit the combat capabilities of Valerie. So again, it doesn't mean it's the only correct option. You could go for something like combat reflexes, you could go for something like blind fight, armor focus, improved initiative, outflank. There's a lot of stuff that you can pick that would also be a good choice, but may involve having a little bit more knowledge on your character and how you want to build them and how it synergizes with the rest of the party. And if you aren't sure what to do, consider recommended features, as they might help guide you through your level up. Something that is also very, very important for your combat, and something that I nearly forgot to mention during this entire gameplay video, or this entire guide, is the fighting defensively option. This is a passive feature that you can enable or disable whenever you want. Every single character will have it right from the start. It's always available. And what this does is you can choose to take a -4 penalty on attack rolls and combat maneuver checks to gain a +2 dodge bonus to your armor class. And like I've mentioned before, dodge bonuses actually do stack with other dodge bonuses. So essentially this will stack with every other bonus you may have for your armor class. It also says, this is more a little bit of a bonus, if you have 3 or more ranks in mobility, you gain a +3 dodge bonus to AC instead. So this is a very useful thing to turn on for your frontline defensive characters, like for example Valerie. It will give you a little bit of a penalty in terms of your attack rolls, so you will not hit as effectively as otherwise you could, but it will make you survive for longer. Increasing your AC by 2 or by 3 if you have mobility is a very good thing to make you a sturdier combatant in the front line. I also want to give a honorable mention here to the Treat Affliction special ability. This again is another feature that is available for every single character right from the start of the game. And what this does is it targets a friendly creature within medium range, and it will attempt to treat an affliction to tend a single diseased or poisoned character. So it will not heal stuff like dexterity, like an ability score damage, but it might actually stop certain conditions from continuing to afflict your characters. So the example I'm using a lot because it's relevant in the early game is the poison status. So if one of your characters get poisoned, you can kind of wait it out until your character actually makes the correct fortitude or whatever saving throws necessary in order to stop the poison from continuing to damage you. Or you can try to simply remove that poison ability by using Treat Affliction. So this would essentially just outright remove the poison condition from your friends. The thing to keep in mind here is that it will make a lore religion check in order to check if it can actually remove the condition or not. So you would ideally want to cast this from a character that has as much lore religion as possible. So in the case of my party, we can see here 3, 1, 1, 0, and 1, but then my cleric has 11. So if I were to try and treat an affliction on someone, I would be using Harem to try and do that. It's very useful, especially early on. Another honorable mention, and it is once again ability which is available for every single character right from the start. You don't need to select anything to have this, is Coup de Grace. This is something that you will very likely not use all that often, but it is again one of those things that can help you out tremendously in the early game. So what this does is, as a full round action, you can use a melee weapon to deliver a coup de grace to a helpless opponent. So important here, it does need to be a melee weapon. You cannot use this with a bow. You automatically hit and score a critical hit. If the defender survives the damage, he must make a fortitude save, or he will just outright die. It does provoke attacks of opportunity, so be careful using this in the middle of a combat. And you cannot deliver a coup de grace against a creature that is immune to critical hits. But these are outliers. So for the most part, what this is in the worst case scenario, it is an automatic critical hit to a helpless character. And in the best case scenario, it will just outright kill the enemy. Even if he has 1000 hit points, he will outright die if he fails a fortitude save. Now, what is relevant to talk about here is what is considered to be a helpless opponent. One of the most common statuses that you may find for a helpless opponent is sleep. So if your opponent is sleeping, he is considered helpless and you can apply a coup de grace on them. This will happen as you go throughout the world. You may find, for example, sleeping bandits, which you can actually find very close to this region where I'm at. So instead of starting a fight by just going up to them and starting to hit them with your sticks, you can instead position your characters in order to deliver coup de grace on as many of those sleeping enemies as possible. You might outright just kill a bunch of them before the fight even starts. A paralyzed enemy, I believe, is also considered a helpless character, so another enabler for a coup de grace. You can also apply the sleep effect via spells. Let me see if I can actually show one here with my wizard. Oh. Sure, sorry, so show other levels. Yeah, it's a level 1 spell. So we have this spell here, enchantment spell. This is just a spell that you target an area and you can put multiple enemies sleeping. And it even says right here, what is it? Sleeping creatures are helpless. So it's a very cool combo, especially early on. You can just cast a sleep spell, put somebody asleep, and then you walk up with one of your melee characters and you coup de grace that enemy and you can just outright kill him. Very useful, especially early in the game. Another noteworthy mention, and my god, I cannot finish this video because I keep on thinking about, about other useful tips, is over here in your belt you have your quick item slots. So these are things that if you go to your inventory you can equip in your quick item slots in order to use them in combat. So you could do something like, for example, if you want to heal, you could just drink a potion by opening up this menu and clicking on the potion right here. Something that may seem a little bit less obvious is that for most consumables, not only can you use them on yourself, so let me just exemplify with Harem here. Not only can you use them on yourself to heal you, but if you have this little button up here, you can click it and you can actually apply this effect on another character. Okay, so even though it's a potion, you can make your friend drink the potion by going up to him and giving the potion to him. So again, it's something you can do by using this little button here and selecting this option. This does not only apply to stuff like healing potions, it also applies to buffs. So you may have a potion of enlarged person, you don't have to drink it yourself. You can actually apply this to another character. Now, why is this relevant? Because naturally you could just drink the potion yourself if you need it, right? You don't have to have someone else give it to you. This is important because you might be stuck in a combat situation where you don't really have the time to drink a potion. You might want to do something else. So in those situations, having somebody give you the potion can be helpful. Another very useful thing is if you have pets in your party. So certain classes will give you pets, such as for example the ranger, and you can actually buff your pet that way. So if you open the inventory on a pet, right now I don't have one to exemplify, I'm sorry about that, but if you open the inventory on a pet, you don't actually get the inventory screen. You cannot do something like right click a potion and use. So in order to give a potion to a pet, like for example mage armor, which is a really cool thing to do on a pet, you would simply, open up your belt quick items, go to the little button on top of, for example, a potion of mage armor or vanish or shield of faith, whatever you may need. Press the spell, target the animal companion, and give him the buff. Very useful thing, very useful little thing that's very hard, very easy to miss as well. Okay, so now I'm just gonna give you guys some generic tips that will help you out a lot while playing this game that are not necessarily tied to gameplay mechanics. And I'm gonna start with autopause. So if you are playing especially in real time with pause, you will know that while you are playing the game, you can press space at any given time to pause the flow of the game. So even in combat, you can pause the game to think about what you want to do, give orders to your characters that they will, fulfill once you unpause the game. It can be movement, it can be an attack order, cast a spell, whatever you may want. Once you unpause, they will go to their places. So one thing you can automate, which is very, very handy, by coming to the options and then under game, if you scroll down a little bit, you will find the auto pause section. And what this means is that you can configure the game to automatically pause the game for you when certain triggers happen. So, for instance, I actually like the default options quite a lot. So stuff like a trap is detected, auto pause the game. This is incredibly helpful. A hidden object is detected. This is actually off by default, I believe. But a lot of times you might be just running through an area, one of your characters makes a perception check, finds a hidden object, but your camera wasn't focused there at the time, and then you lose track of what it was, and you might completely miss a hidden object. But if you have auto pause, as soon as somebody detects, the game pauses, you can move the camera to where that character is, and you can search for the object a lot easier. Other options that I like having are stuff like, for example, pausing when an enemy is spotted. This is mostly for the same reason as the hidden object. You might be running along the map or just focused on something different, or you told your characters to move north and then you open the map to check something out and they're still moving, and you come across some enemies you didn't notice and the combat starts and you weren't ready for it. If you have pause when enemy is spotted, as soon as they come into vision, the game pauses, so we will never go into a fight by accident. Very, very handy. Pausing when a party member has low HP is also quite useful. It gives you a better chance to react to an ally that might get himself killed. And then, it's a lot of preference, right? There's a lot of stuff that might be useful. So at the start, when you still don't really understand stuff like damage immunities, damage reduction, stuff like that, pausing the game when a weapon is ineffective might also be useful, because otherwise you might have a character just swinging at an enemy for half an hour. It's not doing anything and you don't even realize it. And there's just a bunch of different things that you can customize to whatever you want, like when a spell casting finishes or when a spell cast begins, stuff like that. Auto pause is just very, very handy. The other tip that I have for you guys is F5 and F9. So I'm talking about quick saving and quick loading. I don't know why I want to do this. Actually F8. So F5 and F8. In this type of game, it's very easy for you to get into a situation that you are not prepared for, or going into a fight that you might think is easy and then you get devastated, or even just, you go into a fight, you are somewhat prepared, but the enemy casts a spell you aren't expecting that just because has an instant death effect, and it might just game over you on the spot if it kills your main character. So make a habit of, if you are going into something unknown or if you are going into a fight, just quick save the game, go into the fight. If something goes wrong, you can just reload up to that point and continue on. Because if you forget, you might find yourself exploring an entire dungeon, dying at the end, and then you have to do the whole thing all over again. So yeah, quick saving and quick loading are your friends, as well as autopause. Something else that's a little bit more generic, I guess, in terms of advice. I know that a lot of people like to check guides online, especially character build guides. And while this may be useful under certain situations, I will just say be wary of what you are seeing and what you are doing. Blindly following a guide might not be the best thing for you. There are some places that, give you a guide and will explain exactly why they are doing what they are doing and why they choose what they choose, although these are very few and far between. Most of the times you will find guides that just say, level 1 pick this, level 3 pick that, level 20 pick this. And you have no idea why certain things are being picked. So you might actually be looking at a very good build, but you might not understand why it's a good build. You may not use the things that build is supposed to be using. So do take things with a grain of salt, use your brain, try to understand what you are seeing if you are looking at guides, and make sure that whatever you are following or choosing when you do a level up is adequate for what you want to do and is adequate for your playstyle. Okay, just a very brief example, I suppose. Let's say you look up a guide for a melee, and you will see in that guide, like from level 1 up to level 20, all offensive abilities. So everything just increasing damage, increasing critical strikes, all of that good stuff for damage output. But you are playing in your game a melee as one of your frontline characters. What this means is that a melee may deal a lot of damage, but if you charge with her head first into the enemies to be your frontline, she will very likely die almost immediately. And you might think, oh, okay, so either I'm doing something very wrong or this guy just completely sucks. And, it might be that it's neither. You might not be doing anything wrong, or the guide might be good, but not exactly for what you thought it was supposed to be. So just be wary of what you follow if you look up guides online without much context. And I think this will mostly be it, my friends. I think I've covered all of the more relevant aspects of Pathfinder Kingmaker. Something that I didn't reference, but is always something useful. You have the combat log over here, and this will basically tell you everything that the game is doing. So you charge, this is from before, you charge someone, and in this case you can see how the attacks work. So for example, in this case Valerie attacked Rigongar because I charged my own character and she hit. So why did she hit? You can even just, in the middle of combat, if you want to understand, you can pause the game, open up the combat log, you hover over what you want to see, and you can even right click on it. So we know that Valerie attacked Rigongar with a Masterwork Bastard Sword. The attack hit. Why? Because the attack result was 23, which means that she rolled an 18 with her d20 die, and she applied her modifiers, so her attack bonus, which is a 5 currently, so 18 plus 5 equals 23. The target's armor class, so Rigongar's armor class at that time was a 14. The attack roll is over or is higher than the armor class. That means it is a hit. Why do we have the attack bonus of plus 5? We can also learn this. She has a base attack bonus of plus 2, then she gets a bonus from strength, her Bastard Sword gives her a plus 1 to hit as well, she was charging, and she also had a penalty because she is using a tower shield. And in terms of armor class, our friend here was flat-footed. That's why he had 14, it was only considering the base value plus the armor. Did not take into consideration his dexterity or other bonuses. So by inspecting the combat log, you can see exactly everything that's happening. And the same thing for example, damage. In terms of damage, the result was a 7. The damage sword, the damage source was the Masterwork Bastard Sword, and it was 7 because you rolled a 1d10, which in this case rolled a 5, plus a 2 equals 7 slashing damage. You know, later in the game you might find stuff like divided by 2 because the target is resistant to the effect, or mitigated because he has damage reduction, but everything is explained in the combat log, so it is very, very helpful. So, as a conclusion, my friends, I hope that you enjoyed watching this guide. I hope it was at least helpful for certain situations. I think I covered most of what I consider to be the most important factors for, you know, starting to play the game. Like I mentioned, I didn't delve into any advanced tactics. I think that would take a lot more time, and this video is already long enough. Naturally, there will also be some things that maybe I have forgotten, or maybe for me at this point it's kind of automatic and for you it might not be. So if there is something that I didn't cover and you want to know, feel free to leave a comment and I'll try to help out to the best of my ability. As I always say, suggestions are always welcome as well. So again, feel free to leave a comment with that. And if you enjoy the content, consider subscribing. There are many more videos coming out soon. I also have to say that I'm at the same time that this video is coming out, I am starting a playthrough for Pathfinder Kingmaker, so this game naturally, being played on the higher difficulties in Last Aslanti. So it's essentially a no reload run. So if my party dies, the game is over. So as a complement to this guide, if you have questions, leave me a comment, and you can also kind of follow the playthrough so you can see exactly what I'm doing, why I am doing what I'm doing, because I will describe it as I play along, and you can just see how certain encounters are dealt with my own personal strategy, like, you know, tough enemy encounters, certain bosses, or whatever you might need. Everything will be in the playthrough that is currently being uploaded. So, as always, my friends, thank you all so much, and until I see you in the next video, stay safe, Samran.